today, and thanks for tuning in to today's Premier Candidate Conversation with Iain Rankin. As I mentioned, I'm Patrick Sullivan, President and CEO of the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship which Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. I'd like to thank CN very much for sponsoring our Premier Candidate Series this week. Their support allows us to keep these webinars free for everyone. The Halifax Chamber represents over 1,750 member businesses with a combined over 60,000 employees in the greater Halifax area and throughout Nova Scotia. We are a non-partisan organization. We work with all levels of government to advocate on our members' behalf and to ensure a positive business environment and a prosperous Halifax. Campaigning during a pandemic has been a bit and can be a bit restrictive. So we're very pleased to be able to offer this opportunity to get to know the candidates for both our members and for any delegates that are joining us today. This event is being live streamed on the Halifax Chamber's Facebook page. COVID-19 continues to dominate the political and economic landscape, but we're very thankful for access to virtual platforms like this and the ability to connect with fellow Nova Scotians. Before we welcome our guest today, I'd like to briefly share some of the Chamber's priorities for the coming year. The Halifax Chamber recently submitted our 2021-2022 pre-budget submission, providing several recommendations to the province that focused on the impact of COVID-19 on our business community and what government should do to mitigate the impacts of the virus. There's no way around it. 2020 has been a very, very difficult year for many, especially those working in or owning a business in the hardest hit sectors like tourism, hospitality, and the arts. This year, the Halifax Chamber is focusing on optimizing the size of government through publicizing spending amounts and ensuring grants and supports are delivered with a purpose and to those who need them. We must ensure our businesses encounter less friction and see greater openness to communication and transparency from the government. And we're hopeful for an economic plan that can guide our employees and employers through what has been a very dark time, and to the light that we can now see with testing that can ultimately reduce quarantine times, increase tourism, and of course, vaccinations that will make us all safer. We also tasked the provincial government with ensuring we retain our skilled workforce, as our human capital is essential to our survival. We want the provincial government to ensure statistics are relevant and meaningful and that they have consistent plans going forward. It's also pivotal that we reflect on the disproportionate challenges faced by women and underrepresented groups in our economy during the pandemic and what changes we can make to ensure not just their recovery, but growth and prosperity. The pandemic's also shed light on the issues that need more support and greater awareness, like affordable housing and systemic racism. We want to work with our partners to create and accelerate solutions and ensure positive change really sticks as we move forward. We need to promote Halifax as a major city through increased tourism marketing and advertising and better funding for transit systems for Nova Scotians, Haligonians, and travelers as we work towards that prosperous time after the vaccine. We can accomplish this through testing at our airports, increasing our tourism budget, and advocating to keep dwindling air routes in service. We also have a great opportunity to continuously promote Halifax and Nova Scotia as a great place to live while working remotely, given our success during the pandemic and access to high quality services, products, and of course, high-speed internet that is continuing to be rolled out throughout the province. It's clear that downtowns across the country face an even greater challenge, with many workplaces choosing to work from home and leaving businesses without patrons. As the economic generator of Nova Scotia, we need to guarantee that Halifax businesses are given the supports they need to jumpstart the recovery. But the road to recovery isn't a straight line, and we don't expect the provincial or municipal government to know all of the answers, but we truly hope to see the development of a plan for economic growth, consistency, and a way for businesses to remain or become sustainable through this pandemic and beyond. We commend the province on the work they've done during COVID-19 and the communications and relationships developed through the Nova Scotia Business Labour Economic Coalition, which I chair, and has worked very hard with all levels of government as we've endured, I suppose, the pandemic. But there's still much to be done to ensure our business community can indeed grow and flourish and increase our province's economic activity. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our sponsor representative, Tiffany Edwards, Manager Public Affairs and Government Affairs, Atlantic Canada, for CN to say a few words. Tiffany.
Patrick, and very well said. So once again, CN is very pleased to sponsor this series of conversations with Premier candidates. These conversations are where we all come together to share ideas and discuss what our future is to be. CN is often recognized as a mover of the North American economy and an enabler of trade. But another important fact about CN is that we are also a corporate citizen who believes in making a difference in our local communities. CN marries its essential contribution to the economy prosperity by job creation with creating positive and social and environmental change for the well-being of everyone. Before I dive into our very important relationship here in Nova Scotia, I must highlight our government leaders who play such an important role in building our communities, as do the companies and the organizations who are also part of the fabric of this community here. As we often hear, safety is a core value at CN, and it's a critical part of everything we do. We learn from every event on our network to make CN a safer railroad for all our employees, the public, and the communities to which we share. Here in Nova Scotia, it is home to the very wonderful Port of Halifax. CN handles all rail-served containers imported and exported through the marine facility. Halifax is also the site of a major autoport facility where automotive vehicles, are imported from overseas, enter North America, and are distributed across the continent. One of our intermodal terminals as well is located right here in Halifax, and our network investments in the province continue to grow. Finally, as part of CN's commitment to help build safer and stronger communities, I am pleased to hold the title as also Board Secretary at the Halifax Community Board. The Halifax Community Board is comprised of community leaders who provide input on CN's community investments in the region, bringing together leaders together to enhance local decision-making, and we aim to strengthen community relations and increase the impact of local community investments and partnerships here in Halifax. Yesterday, a very exciting announcement was released by CN, and we were pleased to announce that during a very difficult year of 2020, CN's employees and pensioners were able to gather more and raise more, than $2 million of various nonprofits organizations in a moment where we needed it the most. In closing, I would like to thank the Halifax Chamber for this opportunity to join you and everybody today for this very incredible week and very important conversations. On behalf of all of us at CN as well, we would like to thank Premier McNeil for his support in respect to CN's presence in Nova Scotia over the past few years. Thank you very much, Ian. I wish you all the best of luck, and we'll see you again. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much, Tiffany. I will point out, you mentioned Premier McNeil. We will be hosting Premier McNeil next week. Looking forward to that. But now, please welcome Iain Rankin, the Liberal MLA for Timberlea-Prospect. He is running to be leader of the Nova Scotia Liberal Party and our next Premier. Iain was first elected to the legislature in 2013. He was re-elected in 2017 and has served as Minister of the Environment and Minister of Lands and Forestry. He's also served as Government Caucus Chair, Vice Chair of the Public Accounts Committee, Chair of the Nova Scotia section of the Assemblée parlementaire de la francophonie, and as a member of the Treasury and Policy Board. Over to you, Iain, for some introductory comments.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for this opportunity again, and to Tiffany and CN for sponsoring today's event and your valued contribution to our economic prosperity here in the province and in our region. I'll just touch on a little bit more of my background as it relates to business in the chamber. I could recall back in the time that I moved back from Ottawa, where I spent some time getting experience in the private sector, in senior management, in commercial development, and having the opportunity to move home back in 2011. One of the first meetings that we had as a company as we developed Premier Storage was a meeting with the Halifax Chamber, and I could recall Valerie Payne and others at the Ashburn golf course getting together and talking about our business and how we could best contribute to local economy and our membership with the Chamber. So I certainly value the work that the Halifax Chamber does and how they work with government to improve the economic growth of the region and represent the members and businesses large and small across Halifax and around the region. So my background is primarily in the business community prior to politics, and I brought that experience to government, and Patrick's mentioned some of my various roles. I really am proud of the work that our government has been doing over the last 7 years. We've done well to right our fiscal ship. We've been running balanced budgets up until the time of the pandemic, and our economic growth numbers have been successful. Our exports have grown, strong immigration numbers, population growth. So those key performance indicators, I think, are a strong foundation to build on. In this race, I've been proposing to set a vision that is inclusive economic growth and taking some action on climate change and moving the needle on social justice issues. There are a number of challenges that our province faces. Number one being COVID-19. We are still very much in the midst of a pandemic. As we roll out the vaccines, we'll continue to focus on evidence-based decisions, working alongside public health, and making sure that people get vaccines in a timely manner in order of priority, and that will continue. Simultaneously, though, we do need to start thinking about that economic recovery. In February, if I am successful, I will be turning my immediate attention to the needs of businesses that have been impacted, Nova Scotians that I've spoke to across the whole province that had hours cut back or lost their job in itself, and we need to help those people. But we also need to look at 10, 20, 30 years into the future. And so in this race, I've been very clear that I do not believe that it's time to rest on our record, that we should be proposing bold new policies on how to lead the country, frankly, in an economic recovery and take advantage of the opportunities to invest in renewable energy, to bring our buildings to net zero, to electrify our transportation system. These initiatives will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, but at the same time, provide jobs in every corner of the province. And I want to work with the business community. And one of the main initiatives is an economic growth council made up of leaders in the business community across every region of the province, including Halifax, that will help us set the right initiatives and the right investment readiness so that we can attract capital to the province, improve productivity, continue to drive down unemployment rates, and really focus on the wellness of our people, tackling things like child poverty, homelessness, housing. These are issues that are very important to me that I think are our collective responsibility to start tackling. And so those are the priorities that I think set me apart in this race. I'm very much looking at future, and that's where I'm going to be continually focused on. And I really appreciate this opportunity to answer questions that are important to Halifax, the region, and the chamber itself.
That's great. Thanks very much, Iain. Appreciate that that start. I do have some questions, and of course, I've already received some questions from folks who registered for our webinar over the last number of days. I will remind everybody we do have the opportunity to pose additional questions. I see there are already some there. People have learned about this over the last while, I suppose. So there's some Q&A. There's an opportunity with Q&A and the chat. If you could put them in the Q&A, that would be a better spot to place your questions. I'm going to jump in with maybe the easiest question of the day so far, or certainly so far it's the easiest question, the first question. And that is, Iain, I'm a Mount St. Vincent graduate, and you're a Mount St. Vincent graduate. So I'm just wondering how you chose to go to Mount St. Vincent University.
Well, I think well, first of all, it's the closest university to where I grew up here in Timberlea. And we were operating the family gas station during that time. So I was able to actually work and manage the store and work full time, and at the same time do the work at the Mount. And so that was kind of an easy way of conducting my studies. But at the same time, I really believe in the principles that Mount St. Vincent has been strong on: social responsibility, advancement of women in careers, and that continues to this day. So I'm proud to be a Mount St. Vincent alumni.
That's great. Okay, well, that's good to hear. I'm sure we'll take that clip. We'll send it to Mary Bluchard at the Mount. I'm sure she'll be pleased to see that. So thanks for that. So you did outline a little bit about your platform and some of the things that you have in mind. That sounds great. I guess I'm kind of curious about the whole budget issue. So we're right now sitting at an $800 million deficit or so, theoretically. How do you see sort of having some of the things that you have in your platform and the vision that you have? How do you reconcile that with where we are fiscally, and do you see us at a balanced budget or not moving forward?
As a principle, I believe in spending money that's within our own means and not burdening future generations with our current programs and services. And so I would be immediately looking at how we conduct a program review. The last one was 6 years ago, and that's how we did get back to balance. So I think while we stimulate inclusive economic growth, we can also look at programs that have met their stale date, that are not as effective as they once were, and look at discretionary spending in all the departments and start to look at that path back. Now, let's recognize that this budget will not be balanced. We need to make sure that job number one is helping people in time of need and stimulating that economic growth that I referenced, looking at modern infrastructure. And I think that's a bit of a difference that I've proposed in my platform, is not just the traditional way of stimulating economic growth, but futuristic modern infrastructure, supporting the creative economy, supporting clean tech, supporting moving our energy grid to cleaner sources of energy, and things that really help people and really are the cutting edge of future job growth in the province.
Okay. A question from one of our audience members: will you commit to implementing the accessibility roadmap fully by 2030, as the previous government had promised?
Absolutely. It's absolutely critical that we make sure that all Nova Scotians enjoy the success of our future. People from different abilities have been strong leaders on how we get there. We've worked with community groups to propose that legislation that we passed, that we're continuing to implement. It's important to me, as someone that has worked on this initiative alongside community members, like one of my constituents, Sherry Costa, is very strong on making sure that these initiatives take place both in government and in the private sector. We both have responsibilities, and government needs to lead in that area so that businesses make sure that they follow. We've met with companies, Sherry and I, in my region around Bayers Lake, to make sure that when they're building their buildings, they're looking at the Hanson ways that they can make sure that they're going above and beyond current requirements. And we need to continue because it's not fair to families that still today have to choose to go to a restaurant that may not have that different ability. I've talked to some Nova Scotians that have needed to call in advance, and they've got the signal that they are accessible only to get to the restaurant, and have impediments in the way to accessing a washroom or a different area of the province or of the building. So it is important that we continue to keep our commitments in that area.
That's great. And just to point out to the businesses listening, NSCC is about to graduate folks who can help you to look at your accessibility and then ultimately work with you to develop accessibility for your office or your business. So I'm pleased to hear that. I mentioned during my intro the Nova Scotia Business Labour Economic Coalition, which is a big word, a big series of words that we call NS-BLEC. And NS-BLEC has been a group of businesses across the province that have been working with the provincial government, the federal government, and the municipal government to try and provide information to businesses and associations across the province, as well as feedback commentary to the province in particular, in this case, to the province on what we can do better during COVID. I would like to think, and you've kind of alluded to it, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'd like to think that that you're enthusiastic about continuing the work with that group and with other business groups across the province to listen to what they've got to say, certainly during COVID, but after as well.
Definitely, and the fact that there is a framework in place, I think, is a good start, and we'll continue to work with that group. I was referencing an economic growth council that is a similar paradigm where we collaborate on ideas and bring forward initiatives and discuss them in a way that's productive. It's good to hear that there's wide regional representation, which is really important because there are different circumstances facing different communities. And throughout my career, I've always reached out to members of the business community, organizations, different levels of government, and even members of the opposition. I think it's really important to collaborate and really focus on what's in the public interest. And I've done that in various ways, working on policy within our own legislature on our harassment policy. I was chosen by our party to be our representative, and I worked with, at the time, Lenore Zan from the NDP and Chris D'Entremont from the Conservatives, and we put together a policy, an all-party policy that's now adopted in Nova Scotia. So that's just one example of how people can work together that aren't necessarily, that don't necessarily have, are on the same team or have the same goals, but we were able to do that. I can list other examples, but collaboration is something that needs to happen.
Right. Well, I think what you're alluding to is that we're not going to be successful as a province unless we work together. And I think that includes folks from every background. So I guess I'll be specific and say, how will you ensure everyone in Nova Scotia has a voice at the table, and that diversity, equity, and inclusion are top priorities of each department, project, and policy as you become Premier?
Really important. I think the number one thing that I would be doing is putting it in the mandate letters for all of our ministers, clear direction to our institutions. If you look at my platforms on my website at voterankin.ca, you'll see in my healthcare platform, education, and so on down the line, that there are specific components to progress on equity. Underrepresented communities were left out of the conversation, sometimes systematically in our past, and that needs to change. There has been some progress. The Premier has done well to make sure that the appointments to the bench have been more diverse, more African Nova Scotians, Mi'kmaq, and gender parity. That's an important initiative so people can see themselves reflected in the institution. We need to go a step further in our education system so kids see themselves in the classroom, in our healthcare system. We will have better policy when we have more diversity in senior management. I want to see people from the elected body, from different communities, more women in the legislature. I've already noticed in the short time I've been in the legislature, the quality of debate and dialogue and decorum has improved the more that women are involved in politics, and I think that'll continue.
That's great. That's good to hear. Housing supply. So on to our questions from the audience again. Housing supply in our province is at an all-time low with less than 1% vacancy in rentals in many communities with less than 3 months resale inventory. What will you do to ensure that we increase available and affordable housing for all areas of the housing spectrum, including social housing, rental, and purchase?
And that goes back to the discussion of collaboration. It's not any one person's ability to solve a complex issue like this. Market forces are driving the supply down. People are coming to our province because we have such an enviable place to live, especially with the way the pandemic's been handled. It's one of the safest places in the country. So that creates the issue, and we need to work on incentives for developers to continue to build units and work with municipalities so that the right policies and planning strategies are in place around density bonusing and other amendments to the charter that have been outstanding. But job number one is to make sure that we're all working together. I did propose an actual task force that had representation from different levels of government and the private sector and nonprofits. Subsequently, there has been an announcement from the government that drafted a form of that. So I would be looking at a status update on how that's working, how the initiatives are coming out, and working with nonprofits so that we have also an incentive for nonprofits to build, and the province can help with financial guarantees. And that was a policy that came out when I consulted with groups like the Association of Affordable Housing, but also homelessness is a big issue here in the region with some 485 people on the street, and we need to really take that issue seriously. and work with community groups. And again, there's disproportionate impacts to our Mi'kmaq communities, to African Nova Scotians, and these are issues that we need to take very seriously and take action on.
Okay. I know in your platform you talk a little bit about hospitality businesses, but just to expand that a little bit, there are businesses that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, by the loss of, frankly, 2 million visitors that would normally come to Nova Scotia. So when we think of restaurants, we think of hotels, we think of events, we think of arts groups. I guess I'm wondering how will you support those businesses as we get through COVID and as we come out of COVID?
That sector of our economy is so important. There are so many Nova Scotians that work in hospitality across the whole province. I myself managed a hotel in rural Nova Scotia that had a restaurant in the hotel in Amherst, and I've been in hospitality industries much of my life and understand how important it is. And I think we need to make sure that when we're giving tax relief or other programs to businesses, that it is the most effective use of public funds. And that's why I didn't come up with any specific arbitrary amount without knowing where we're going to be in February, and seeing the analysis of how impactful our relief programs to date have been, how they complement the federal programs that have been rolled out. But as a whole, that sector will need significant investment to rebound back strongly. We're going to need a marketing campaign that's aggressive, because it will be competitive with other regions that are facing the same thing. We should have the confidence that we have a product that is better than any other place in the country, drawing in visitors into Halifax and across our rural areas. Part of my plan also talks about protecting more of nature and more provincial parks because of our increased use. More and more Nova Scotians are wanting to get out and enjoy areas that they've never seen. Tourists are the same thing. We're going to need to make sure that we make those investments so that we build back the strong numbers that we've had previous to COVID-19.
Okay, a rather lengthy question, but I'm going to try and distill it down here. Statistics Canada reports 1 in 6 citizens can't pass necessary literacy, I can't do it either, literacy tests involving reading, comprehension, mathematics, and that 1 in 5 of the jobs they work in may face automation. So they seek support. These citizens seek support from community-based organizations, but those community-based organizations are not considered part of the public education system. So they're not, therefore the learners are not eligible to participate in the Canada Summer Jobs Plans and Nova Scotia Summer Skills Plan. What will you do as Premier to ensure that there are hiring incentives for students that are equitable and inclusive, regardless of the learning pathway they take?
Really important that when we look at an economic growth plan, that nobody's left behind in the discussion. And if there are certain impediments that are restricting people and holding people back, programs are going to be required. I often see that the organizations that are in communities are able to more effectively deliver programs than government, and often at a lower cost. And I would work, first of all, with the community council sector that I've met with during this race in Annika, and seeing what nonprofits are already tackling these issues, and make sure that we get advice to see if there's any adjustments that we need to make within our own public education system. Literacy and numeracy has been a focus since we came into government, and improving that in schools. But I have read those statistics beyond the school years, and it's troubling. Nationally, we have some challenges there, and this speaks to the importance of a premier making sure that there's priorities when we go to the First Minister's meeting, when we're looking at ways to collaborate. Similar to housing, there's funding that needs to come our way from the federal government. Long-term care is another one. These are complex issues that require strong partnerships and collaboration.
Okay, great. What's your vision to ensure Nova Scotia sees economic recovery, but also accelerating climate action initiatives?
This has been a central part of my campaign because I think that there are big opportunities. Globally, we see a massive realignment of where the world's finances are going, and big companies that are in the stock market are moving their investments to clean growth funds, and companies here in Nova Scotia have made climate commitments like Michelin, net neutral by 2050, similar to our own target. I believe that our province can be the first in Canada to become net neutral. One of the things we need to do right away is have a concrete plan on how to get off coal. We can do that in an affordable way. In fact, we can't afford not to do it because it will become an economic liability for us, especially with carbon pricing rising up. But we still have over 50% of our electricity reliant on coal. So I've been clear, the only candidate with a plan to get off of coal by investing in local renewable energy, namely wind and solar. And as we build our efficiency programs, there's 2,500 jobs associated with efficiency in our province now. If we grow that and take a leadership role in government, in our public buildings, similarly to what the federal government has done, and bringing our buildings to net zero, incentives for businesses to do the same, that will stimulate economic growth for people in skilled trades. And that means we also need to work with our public institutions, their post-secondary institutions, to make sure that we have the right training for that job boom that I know will happen in every part of the province. And that's where the tie is between economic growth and environment. I led a company in Ottawa that invested in solar energy. They are now the largest private sector provider of power in that city. And it is all solar, it's clean, and it actually helped the bottom line of that company. So we're beyond the discussion now that taking action on climate change somehow adversely impacts economic growth. We have this opportunity that is right in front of us that we need to take advantage of.
Okay. It may surprise you to know that over 250 of our members at the Halifax Chamber are not-for-profits. So it often surprises people, but we have a lot of support from not-for-profits, and we provide them a lot of support as well. How would you support small not-for-profits as we move forward?
I would look at their funding model. I know one of the challenges are, and I've volunteered for nonprofits prior to politics, and I know one of the challenges are the one-off types of funding programs that they need to continue to apply for. That creates a challenge from an employment perspective and not giving the certainty for employees to have a job, say, in a multi-year outlook. And we need to start looking at how they are funded so that we can create that more certainty for organizations, similarly to what the business community wants is certainty. So you could understand why they see that and why it becomes a challenge. Nonprofits that run organizations like the community center in my area in Prospect have done an outstanding job. And I think, again, they are able to deliver programs often more effectively than government. Community Cares up in North Side in Sydney does wonderful work, and it's because of the long service of Dorothy in that region that's able to help people navigate finding resources for food banks, for mental health services, and so on down the line. So they're really valued part of our economy, part of our social fabric in Nova Scotia, and I would be very supportive in trying to find ways to work together for that reason.
We've talked a little bit about inclusivity, but children need to see people that look like them at the front of the class. How would you work to have a more inclusive policy, kind of as the driver to get greater representation in education and in other sectors that doesn't take a generation to do?
It is a challenge because we do need to make sure that we have more representation at the administrative level. And I spoke about this with Karen Hudson in Auburn High. And one of the challenges of when you promote more African Nova Scotians to that level is then you take some out of the classroom. So it needs to be a concerted effort all the way around the whole system to ensure that we do have more people from underrepresented communities in the administrative level, teaching in classrooms in the support level, and ensuring that we have a welcoming environment so that they're there. We tackle systemic racism together, which is going to be something that will require all hands on deck. It's going to require intentional training in our PD days so that teachers understand the culture of Nova Scotia and our shared history and what has taken place and the fractured relationship that has happened So these are not easy issues. It's a central part of my platform in all departments, but specifically in education. You can see that there'll be continued efforts to make sure that we recruit and that we train people to make sure that happens.
Okay. We talked a little bit about hospitality and some of the businesses there. The Chamber has actually recommended that we put, the government put $10 million into attracting people to Nova Scotia by increasing the marketing budget for Tourism Nova Scotia or spreading that around, whether it's the rest of Canada or ultimately other markets. What's your vision for the recovery of the tourism industry?
It will require, I don't know the order of magnitude without being at the Treasury Board table over the last few months, but the budgeting process is well underway. I do have to balance other considerations, but definitely a priority will be needed to focus on how we attract people to our province, and both from a marketing perspective and for placemaking and some of the initiatives that have taken place to showcase our province and build on the strengths of always being in proximity of the ocean, those natural spaces that we need to increase so that people have access to more and more. Once we get people here, they're going to want to stay. Anecdotally, we know of all the people that are actually buying houses without even coming here first, buying them through seeing pictures online. So let's be proud of the product we have and capitalize on it.
Right. Well, and I'm going to push back a little bit and just say, I know a little bit about the tourism industry. It is one of the lowest cost investments that can provide a significant return. So there's my pitch back. So, and I'll be happy to provide you some details, as well as I can see the folks who are listening, I know they can as well. So
yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I know we've had meetings when you were in that role in the past, and I was pushing for that development along Prospect Road to dress up that major route down to Peggy's Cove, and some of that's happening now with active transportation lanes and beautification, and those are the placemaking type of initiatives we need to look at as well.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. So you were in cabinet. You weren't responsible for healthcare, but you were at the cabinet table. Healthcare is almost 50% of the budget, or probably greater than 50% of the budget when you put it all together. How do we reduce the cost of administration in healthcare to provide more services for Nova Scotians? And what can you do with a healthcare budget that's 50% of the total provincial budget? And we learned yesterday that, and it's not really a surprise, that seniors are aging, and that there's going to be more of them in the coming years who will probably be greater consumers of healthcare.
Yeah, I think it's every day. Last I checked, there's 30 some people that reach the age of 65. So we're looking at around 1,000 a month. That's no secret that our aging population is going to require concerted efforts to grow our population, as we've been doing, and making sure that we continue to increase immigration and in-migration from other provinces. With respect to the way our healthcare system operates and is structured, it was the right decision, I believe, in a province of less than 1 million people to have one Nova Scotia Health Authority. The pandemic was managed more effectively with that model. However, there are some areas I believe that we can improve upon. I think the savings that we immediately saw from removing some of the top level managers were immediately swallowed up. And we need to make sure that we're really focusing resources in frontline care. One of the initiatives I propose is a review between the Nova Scotia Health Authority, Department of Health, and Dow Med School. I think that Dalhousie is an asset that we need to start tapping into. It's a concept that's been spoken about in the past, a university health network, and how you can maximize collaboration and utilize some of the research that's happening at Dow with our med school, but even our economists that are working on their PhDs and their masters on how to use our data and how to make more effective investments. So it's not an easy solution, but it's something I think that we can start looking at.
Okay, great. Another question, the highway plan. I don't know whose highway plan it is, but let's say I think there was actually a plan released yesterday or the last couple of days. Will cost the province over $700 million. The comment is new highways are redundant, induce demand of car ownership, increase greenhouse gas emissions, compromise ecologically sensitive land, and increase liability costs to the province for the long term. So what's your position on what appears to be significant highway development in Nova Scotia?
I think that we need to look beyond just highway work. I referenced that in how I would approach economic stimulus. There are areas of the province that require work, and there are some communities that have presented a case where highway twinning would save lives, and so I've supported the twinning project to Antigonish and the stretch on the 103. But when we did the study back in 2016 or 15, Nova Scotians did ask us to look at lower cost alternatives in areas. And so I would be looking at those and making sure that we're investing in infrastructure, that we look at active transportation in communities, and that we electrify our transportation system. Those are the areas of focus that I took for this campaign. It is a difference for me, and making sure that we have that. And what I've done is looked at the federal programs that are available. There are no federal programs available for highways right now, but there is for green infrastructure and transit. And so I've committed to $80 million that would go into that, and would have more than matched funds from the federal government, so that we have electric buses in places like Halifax, ferry system in Bedford. I've committed to those projects because I think that the comment is true, that we should be looking 10, 20, 30 years ahead and not just relying on roads.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to try and be unbiased and not comment on that, but it sounds like a pretty good answer. There's a lot of support for technology companies. There's Volta, does great work in downtown Halifax. There's sandboxes around the province. There's been some great work. But one of the things that we've noticed has been growing significantly over the last little while are life sciences or biotechnology companies. And you referenced Dow. There's a lot of universities across Nova Scotia that produce great science graduates. How do you intend to support local biotechnology or life science companies, or is there a way?
It's by supporting research and innovation. I think in all of our sectors, including traditional sectors, that will be the key to continuing to be competitive in an increasingly competitive environment. And our asset is our post-secondary institutions at the university level. If you look at the work that's happened in our labs with the contract for batteries for Tesla, and that's really spun off into companies. And so it matters to all industries that are looking at clean tech, the ocean economy. There's a number of, I think, opportunities for us to invest in research and development and find ways to monetize that public investment, whether it's advanced manufacturing, growing our exports. That is the key and our strength, I believe, and our comparative advantage for having so many different institutions in a relatively smaller province here.
Okay. Consultations on the Sustainable Development Goals Act. Do you know when those will begin, or should they begin?
They should begin immediately. It's an important piece of legislation that advances what was the EGSPA Act before our government, which had targets for land protection, renewable energy, and other key performance indicators. I've proposed some in this campaign already for renewable energy, the only candidate to do so, but also land protection. So I've committed to protecting the rest of our land from the plan to get us to 14%, and then creating a new process to look at more land of biodiversity value, incorporating Indigenous-led protected areas, looking at net zero buildings. We just talked about electrification of transportation. These elements all should be part of this new act that was passed, that had the target for GHG reduction and carbon neutrality. So it would be a priority for me to get those consultations underway and get some new hard commitments into our targets.
Great. There's been a number of organizations that have commented on interprovincial trade barriers and how a reduction in interprovincial trade barriers would add to Canada's GDP and ultimately, I suspect, to Nova Scotia's GDP. How do you feel about interprovincial trade barriers, and would you like to see them reduced as Premier?
For sure. I think it's also a priority for a Premier to take to the not only the First Minister's table, but our Atlantic region, when I think that's where we could absolutely start. to remove barriers for trade. This is something that the wine sector has been asking for a while, and we need to do our best to make sure that we have something that's love to see a free trade zone in our Atlantic region. The Western provinces have worked together with agreements to take down these types of barriers, and I'd like to see something similar here. I'd like to see more regional cooperation as a whole. I think that as an economic center, we can do better by working together, removing these unnecessary barriers. It shouldn't be hard to send a bottle of wine to Ontario. I believe it's harder to do that than it is to send to China right now. So definitely would be eager to start breaking down these barriers for our business community.
That's great. Well, and I think actually the Western provinces are inviting other provinces to join that trade region, which sounds pretty strange since it's the Western trade region. We talked about this a little bit in terms of affordable housing or housing, but specifically, do you think rent control is the right fix, or are there other tools or processes that can be used to ensure affordable housing for Nova Scotia?
I think it's about making sure that you explore all options and not ruling out any of our policy choices arbitrarily. I think that there's not one policy that's going to fix an issue like this. It's a long time coming, and we need to start looking at ways that we can stimulate the supply, but also during times where we're under a state of emergency. In my view, it was the right thing to do to put a cap in place. Most landlords and businesses are very they're good to their tenants, and they don't levy what I think are unreasonable increases in the double digits. But I have heard of those, so I thought that it was in the public interest to put in place a policy that would limit that from happening. And again, the government has come out with actually a more aggressive percentage on their rent control. So that would be reviewed by a task force or the structure that's in place now as we wind out of the pandemic to see what policy we should be having in place for the long term.
Okay, great. So you mentioned in the beginning, in your introductory comments, you mentioned kind of that long-term vision. So what is your vision for Nova Scotia for the next 5, 10, or 20 years?
A more inclusive society. I think that we also need to attract more young people back to our province, as I did back in 2011, with policy that helps create future job growth in our community around ocean tech, around clean energy, making our resource development companies more sustainable and responsible, more protected area space. So we see opportunities for active living. Government can invest in vibrant communities. We need to get off coal. We need to address some of the issues around homelessness, child poverty. These are issues that are important to a lot of people. And I know Nova Scotia is on the cusp of really something special here and gaining more momentum. We can be the startup capital of the world here in Halifax. We can take on some real initiatives with our assets here. And it's not just Halifax, although we're now the second fastest growing area in the country. There's momentum in rural areas. We have this opportunity for a real rural renaissance with people working from home and actually remotely employed in other provinces because our quality of life is something to be admired. We're a safe place to be. We need to really start taking some action on climate change, on social justice, and stimulate that future economic growth opportunity.
So I hear that there's a lot of stuff. What's your number one priority, number 2, or number 3, or top 3 priorities, I guess, over the next year or 2?
And those are always tough questions, but I think when I've asked about what's your immediate area to address, it is long-term care in terms of an investment. I think that that's required. Looking at our existing buildings with a capital plan that looks at risk assessments and which buildings need the most action and investment, and our staffing model. But I really think that we need to start looking at reorienting our economy for that clean growth strategy, and also looking at areas that have been elevated to the surface that need attention, like services for mental health. People in different communities across the province have varying access. And so that's another area that we need to focus on. But it all comes back to the vision of making more healthy communities that are more sustainable and that are more fair.
Right. Okay. So there's 3 candidates for the leadership. You know the other 2 quite well. Why you, Iain? Why are you the right person to be the next Premier of Nova Scotia?
Because I'm proposing generational change. We've all worked together on files and have tremendous success that we talked about around population growth, balancing our budget. But I don't think that that's where we should rest. I think that we really need to look at that reorientation of our economy, not just focusing on GDP. We need to look at the wellness side and how people, where our investments are going, not just looking backward at our achievements, but looking forward for a robust economic recovery that benefits all regions, that tackles systemic racism. I've been very clear on this vision from the launch back in October when I proposed to run it. What drives me to run is to tackle these issues that are not easy to tackle, but we owe it to all Nova Scotians. It's our shared history to repair some of these relationships, and we can do this together.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience as I look at all the folks that are listening right now?
Well, I really appreciate everyone tuning in. I think that if most people are members of the Halifax Chamber, I want to thank you for your work at promoting and helping the economic growth that we're all seeing in different parts of Halifax. I think a strong Halifax, a strong capital city is really good for our province. It benefits the whole province. And I really appreciate the work you're doing. I'm going to continue to do my best to help the province and Halifax grow. Well, that sounds great to me. And of course, I would agree with all of those comments. Yes, a strong Halifax is very important to the rest of the economy, with greater than 50% of the GDP coming out of this center. And Halifax is in a difficult place right now as COVID has continued. And obviously, we'd all like to see us come out better the other end. But I'll stop us there. Sorry, I should add one more thing. Iain, what do you think of patios and dogs? So you saw that I proposed that. As a dog owner, I think it's one of those things I think that we can do in terms of modernizing alcohol regulations, restaurants, hospitality industry as a whole. We need to become a city that's more with the times, I'll say. Okay. Well, as a dog owner as well, I did notice that in your platform. And I do think that's just another opportunity for us to get people out to some of the restaurants and locations that they need to get to as we come out of the pandemic. So I think that's, I'm going to be unbiased, but I think the other candidates should copy that one. So that's a great one. Thank you. So thank you very much, Iain, for joining us today. And I know our attendees really appreciate the opportunity to hear from you directly on your priorities. And again, thank you to CN and Tiffany for supporting our Premier Candidate series, which has now concluded with our 3rd candidate. All of those Facebook Live interviews or discussions will be available on our website, on our Facebook page, and will be eventually available on YouTube as well. And thank you everyone for coming. Had a big audience today. We're really thrilled to see so many engaged citizens. It's really important to be engaged. And as Iain said, he welcomes feedback. And I must say, in general, everyone that I speak to in government on an ongoing basis is always interested in hearing the comments of the public or business owners or individuals. So thank you very much for everyone for attending. We look forward to maintaining a very strong relationship with our next Premier and advocating on behalf of the Halifax business community. Next week, we will have Premier McNeil's farewell address. So I'm sure Iain will be tuning in. All of the candidate sessions will be available on YouTube next week. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you very much, Iain. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.